Welcome to my channel. I'm Nancy Miller, your storyteller, bringing you tales from American folklore, thrilling mysteries, and all sorts of intriguing topics. Join me for today's story. There was once a girl named Little Daisy, as pretty as a wildflower blooming in the prairie sun. But oh, how unlucky she was. She married a man hooked on gambling, a fella by the name of Walter Dunn. Now, Walter wasn't all bad, mind you. He was a skilled carpenter back in the day. Before he tied the knot with Little Daisy, he was a hard-working man who earned a decent pile of silver dollars. He even fixed up 2 fine houses with shingle roofs, good enough that plenty of gals in town had their eyes on him, hoping to snag him for a husband. But Walter Dunn had big dreams and high standards. He wasn't about to settle for just anyone. He even hired a matchmaker to scout out more than a dozen prospects for him. In the end, he picked Little Daisy to be his bride. For the first 6 months after the wedding, Walter still went out to work, hammering nails and sawing wood to bring home some cash. Back then, Little Daisy's life was as sweet as a summer breeze. They had a cozy home, and things seemed brighter than a full moon over the plains. But then, things took a turn for the worse when Walter got bit by the gambling bug. Once that fever set in, he turned lazy as a hound on a hot porch. He stopped taking carpentry jobs altogether. Instead, he started running with a rough crowd, outlaws, drifters, and no-good types who hung around the saloons and gambling dens. Every one of those fellas knew the old saying, 10 bets, 9 losses. Walter Dunn was no exception. It didn't take long for him to squander everything he'd worked so hard for over the years. Nearly 100 silver dollars, gone, lost to the clatter of dice and the flip of cards. Not only did he blow through his savings like a dust storm through a dry gulch, but he also ended up owing money all over town. Debts to kinfolk and friends that piled up higher than a horse's hindquarters. Now, you'd think at this point Walter would have seen the light, hung up his gambling hat, and turned over a new leaf. But no, sir. He hadn't hit rock bottom yet. The constant losing made his temper flare up something fierce. A man who'd once been as mild as a spring lamb turned meaner than a rattlesnake with a toothache. To let off steam, he'd pick fights with Little Daisy, yelling at her over nothing, and sometimes even raising a hand to her. One crisp September morning, Little Daisy hauled a big load of laundry down to the riverbank. Her neighbor, Clara Sims, was there too, scrubbing clothes and chatting away. But when Clara glanced over, she saw Little Daisy crying as she worked, tears dripping into the wash water. Clara paused, set her scrubbing aside, and looked up. "Little Daisy," she said, "did that no-good husband of yours go and bully you again?" Little Daisy just kept her head down, sobbing quietly, not saying a word. Clara didn't need an answer to figure it out. She reckoned Walter Dunn had been at it again, tormenting poor Daisy. "That rotten skunk," Clara muttered to herself. "If he ain't picking on her every day, he ain't happy, is he? Be a fine thing if someone could get rid of him for good." Being neighbors, Clara knew the ins and outs of Little Daisy's troubles like the back of her hand. Hardly a day went by when she didn't hear Daisy's cries drifting through the thin walls of their homes. It was plain as day to Clara. Walter had probably lost another round at the poker table and was taking it out on Daisy again. She wished Daisy could up and leave that miserable house. Heck, Clara even daydreamed about giving Walter a good thrashing herself, so he'd never lay a finger on Daisy again. But in those days, women didn't have much say in things. And Clara, like Daisy, was just a regular gal, soft-spoken and not built for fighting back against a bully like Walter. "Clara, I'm fine," Little Daisy finally said, wiping her tears away after a long spell. She lifted her head slow and steady to face her friend. "Thanks for checking on me." Clara caught a glimpse of Daisy's face, red fingerprints stark against her cheek, fresh as a brand. Her heart sank even deeper. Without thinking, she grabbed a stick from the ground and whacked it against a rock twice hard. "Walter Dunn's gone and beat you up like this, and you say you're fine," she snapped. "Humph. I'd love to take a couple swings at that lowlife myself." "Who are you planning to wallop with that stick?" a voice called out from behind. Clara didn't even need to turn around to know it was Sam Tucker, the local mason, strolling up to the riverbank. Sam Tucker was a broad-shouldered mason with a bear-like build, tough as nails and not half bad-looking either. At 30 years old, he was still a bachelor. Not because his pockets were empty. Sam made a fair living laying bricks and stone, but because he'd been carrying a torch for Clara Sims ever since he laid eyes on her. He'd been waiting quietly, hoping she'd come around one day. This year, Clara had finally hit marrying age herself. She wouldn't have minded hitching her wagon to Sam's star, truth be told. But her ma thought Clara was too pretty to settle for a plain old mason. She figured her daughter could snag a richer catch, so she kept turning down Sam's folks when they came knocking with a proposal. Ma Sims had even roped in a few local busybodies to scout out better prospects for Clara. Back in those days, out on the frontier, marriage was all about what the parents wanted. A gal could nod her head all she liked, but if Ma and Pa didn't sign off, it wasn't happening. So even if Clara was sweet on Sam, she couldn't just up and marry him, not without her folks' blessing. "Need a hand with that washing, Clara?" Sam called out as he ambled over. He'd been on his way out of town to look for work when he spotted her by the river. Suddenly, the idea of heading into the hills lost all its shine. Dropping his gear without a second thought, he squatted down beside her, eager to lend a hand. Clara, still fuming over little Daisy's troubles, pursed her lips. "I've only got a few pieces here," she said. "Take a look at Daisy's pile. Why don't you help her instead?" "Daisy's hitched already," Sam replied, scratching his head. "That husband of hers is meaner than a cornered bobcat. If he caught me washing her clothes, he'd reckon I was up to no good. I'd rather steer clear of that mess." Clara mulled it over and nodded. "Fair point," she said. "Guess I don't need you hovering around here either then. Go on and tend to your own business. Folks might start flapping their gums if they see us together too long." "Ah shucks," Sam said, a little sheepish. "How about I just wash one or two things for Daisy? Won't hurt none." Thinking Clara might be sore at him, he quickly grabbed a shirt from Daisy's pile. Little Daisy panicked, snatching it back fast. She didn't want word getting back to Walter that some fellow was helping her out. Lord knew what kind of trouble that'd stir up in town. "I don't need your help neither," she snapped, her voice sharp as a whip. "Get along now." All right, Sam muttered, his face turning red as a beet. Feeling a mite embarrassed, he stood up, figuring he'd just hang back and watch Clara finish up instead. Clara's laundry didn't take long, and soon she was packing it into her basket. Glancing over, she saw Sam still lingering nearby. Then it hit her. Walter Dunn's latest stunt flashed back to mind, and an idea sparked. She waved Sam over quick. "Hey Sam," she said, lowering her voice. "That no-account Walter woke up this morning and laid into Daisy again. You're a big, strapping fella, could lick a varmint like him easy. Think you could teach him a lesson for Daisy's sake? Make it so he don't dare raise a hand to her no more." "Why wouldn't I dare?" Sam shot back, puffing out his chest. "That lazy good-for-nothing don't just sit around all day, he's out there picking on folks too. I'll go straighten him out right now." Clara's eyes sparkled, and a blush crept up her cheeks. "Thanks, Sam," she said softly. "No need for thanks," he grinned. "Meet me by your back door later. I'll let you know how it goes. Anything you ask me to do, Clara, that's a big deal to me." With that, Sam tipped his hat and marched straight off toward Walter Dunn's place. Walter had just finished his breakfast, sitting there scratching his head, wondering where he could scrounge up some cash to hit the gambling tables again. He'd already borrowed from every kinfolk and friend who'd listen, and now nobody in town would spare him a dime. "What's a fella to do?" he grumbled, stumped. Right then, a sharp knock rattled his door. "Who's there?" Walter barked, stomping over, his mood sour as week old milk. "It's me, Sam Tucker," came the reply from outside. Walter perked up. He knew Sam had a steady job, maybe he could squeeze a few bucks out of him. 5, 6, maybe even $8 could keep him in the game. A sly grin spread across his face as he swung the door open wide. "Well, howdy, Sam," he said, all sunshine and charm. "What brings you out here? Ain't you usually off hauling stone this time of day? Quite the rare visitor, ain't ya?" Sam didn't bother tipping his hat back or beating around the bush. He strode right into Walter's yard and planted himself under the big pear tree out front. "Walter Dunn," he called out, voice steady as a rock. "Word around town is you roughed up little Daisy again this morning. That true?" "Who's flapping their gums about that?" Walter shot back, his friendly grin fading fast. He could tell Sam wasn't here to swap pleasantries. This fella was out for blood. "His face darkened like a storm rolling in." "Don't matter who said it," Sam growled, stepping closer. "I'm asking you plain, did you lay hands on Daisy again or not?" "What if I did?" Walter sneered, crossing his arms.
This here is my house, my business. What's it to you, Tucker?
You ain't got no right sticking your nose in my affairs. That was the last straw. Sam wasn't about to let Walter's high and mighty attitude slide. Quick as a flash, he spun around and landed a solid kick square in Walter's chest. Caught off guard, Walter stumbled back and hit the dirt with a thud, eating dust like a steer in a stampede. Before he could scramble up, Sam was on him, straddling his back, fists flying like a blacksmith's hammer. You think you've got the right to beat on folks, huh? Sam roared between punches. Well, I'm here to set you straight for Daisy. Let's see if you've got the guts to try that again after this. Walter had figured Sam wouldn't dare go all out. He tried to tough it out, jaw clenched like a mule chewing gravel. But Sam wasn't playing around. He leaned in harder, each blow landing heavier than the last. Soon enough, Walter was hollering like a stuck pig, his bravado crumbling faster than a dry biscuit.
Allrecht, allrecht.
Stop, he yelped, flailing under Sam's weight. I swear I won't touch her no more. I'm done. And if you go back on that? Sam pressed, pausing his fists just long enough to hear the answer.
If I do, my Lichtningstrike edet 5 times over.
Walter wailed, desperate to get out from under the beating. I'll be a goner for sure. Sam eased up, satisfied with the oath. You'd better be a man of your word, Dunn, he said, standing tall and brushing the dust off his hands.
Remember what you said today.
With that, he turned on his heel and swaggered off, leaving Walter sprawled in the yard. It didn't take Sam long to track down Clara. He found her waiting by her back door, just like he'd promised. Well, I gave Walter Dunn a licking he won't forget, Sam said with a grin. Pounded him till he squealed and swore up and down he'd never lay a finger on Daisy again. Even made a big ol oath about it, lightning and all.
Clara's face lit up like a lantern at dusk.
I heard him howling from clear across town, she laughed. He got what was coming to him this time. But he won't dare bother Daisy now. Thanks, Sam, you're a real stand-up fella. Ah shucks, no need for that, Sam said, rubbing the back of his neck.
But listen, Clara. Tell your masometing for me.
When she's picking out a husband for you, make sure it ain't some lowlife like Walter Dunn.
You deserve a man who's hardworking and good-hearted, like me, Maybe.
Oh you. Clara blushed crimson and swatted at him playfully before darting off, leaving Sam chuckling to himself. After that walloping, Walter didn't go looking for Daisy down by the river to stir up more trouble. Instead, he limped off into town, wandering the dusty streets till night fell. It was well past dark when he finally dragged himself home. Little Daisy was in the kitchen, fixing to rustle up some supper, when she peeked into the grain bin. Her heart sank. It was emptier than a dry well. Walter, she said, voice soft and hesitant, we're plumb out of cornmeal. How about we just have some water tonight? Come morning, I'll head over to my folks' place and ask Ma for a bit of grain.
What do you reckon?
No need to traipse back to your folks tomorrow, Walter replied, his eyes shifting like a coyote caught in a trap. I spent the day poking around town and landed us 2 jobs over at the Thompson Ranch. Room and board included, plus $100 a month each. 2 jobs.
Daisy's eyes widened, a spark of hope flickering.
You mean you got me a spot too? $100 a month. Walter nodded, real serious like. Yup. You take 100, I take 100. In a year, we'll have a nice little nest egg saved up. I'm done with gambling, Daisy, I swear it.
Oh, Walter.
Daisy threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her cheeks.
You haven't let me down.
For the first time in ages, the weight of all those bitter years seemed to lift, and she clung to him like a lifeline. The next morning, little Daisy packed a small bundle of belongings, her heart buzzing with hope. She followed Walter out of their rundown shack and into town, dreaming of a fresh start at the Thompson Ranch. Sure enough, Walter led her straight to the big spread, a sprawling outfit run by the wealthy Thompson family. But what Daisy didn't know was that Walter had struck a deal on the sly. For $2 silver, he'd sold her off to the Thompsons as a hired hand. The minute he pocketed the cash, Walter hightailed it to the nearest saloon. With a grin as wide as the Mississippi, he slapped those $2 down on the poker table, ready to turn his luck around. Meanwhile, little Daisy was still starry-eyed, thinking she was about to start a new life, cooking, cleaning, maybe even earning enough to fix up their home. The Thompsons weren't just rich ranchers, they had a dark side. Behind their cattle empire, they were running a smuggling ring, dealing in moonshine whiskey, a trade strictly outlawed by the federal marshals. Back then, liquor laws were tight as a drum. If you got caught selling hooch on the side, you'd face jail time at best, or a noose at worst. The Thompsons kept their operation hush-hush, but plenty of roughnecks in town knew they'd made their fortune pouring illegal firewater. Walter, oblivious to all that, figured he could parlay his $2 into a big win. With years of gambling under his belt, he reckoned he had the know-how to flip that small stake into a pile of cash. But luck wasn't on his side, not even close. In less than half an hour, he'd lost every last cent, the saloon swallowing his money like a buzzard on carrion. Out of options, Walter slunk back to town, his mind churning. He started sneaking around, pilfering chickens and snatching dogs, anything he could sell to scrape together a few coins. He was dead set on clawing his way back to the poker table with whatever he could steal. But Walter wasn't cut out for thieving. 2 or 3 botched attempts later, he hadn't nabbed a thing, except a nasty bite on the backside from Old Man Carter's big yellow hound over in East Hollow. After that fiasco, Walter holed up at home for a few days, licking his wounds. But he didn't sit idle. Hunger gnawed at him, and with Daisy gone, there was no one to cook. So he took to raiding orchards, swiping apples and pears from folks' trees. Can't steal livestock, he figured, but fruit's fair game. Meanwhile, little Daisy was out of the picture, and Clara Sims started to notice. She wasn't hearing Daisy's cries in the dead of night anymore, and it struck her as mighty peculiar. One day she tracked down Sam Tucker and asked, "Sam, ever since you gave Walter Dunn that thrashing, I ain't seen hide nor hair of Daisy. You reckon that skunk got scared of another beating and sent her packing somewhere?" "No way," Sam said, scratching his chin. "Daisy's a pretty gal, hardworking too. If Walter ran her off, where's he gonna find another wife like that? Don't add up." Clara frowned, her lips pursed tight. "Then why haven't I seen her these past few days?" "So meeting's fishy." "Walter's a spiteful cuss, he wouldn't do something to her, would he?" "Only one way to find out," Sam replied. "You want me to go poke around and ask him?" "If he's hurt her, he ain't gonna admit it," Clara pointed out, stomping her foot. "Tell you what, why don't you shadow him for a spell? See what he's up to." "All right, I'm on it," Sam nodded. He didn't just want to ease Clara's mind, he felt a duty to set things right. That afternoon, he slipped over to Walter's place and hid out, keeping an eye peeled. Sure enough, come midday, Walter stirred from his nap, belly growling like a bear in spring. "Reckon I'll head over to Widow Jenkins' cucumber patch," he muttered to himself. "Snag a few to tide me over." He crept out the back door, weaving through alleys until he reached the widow's field. Slipping in, he yanked a cucumber off the vine and took a big bite, then stuffed a couple more up his sleeve for later. Sam saw his chance. Springing from his hiding spot, he grabbed Walter by the collar and hauled him up. Well, Walter Dunn," he said, voice cold as a winter wind.
"Kaukt du red-handed, stealing from Widow Jenkins."
"You're coming with me to see the sheriff."
"No, Sam, hold up."
Walter pleaded, squirming like a worm on a hook.
"Let me go, I swear I won't do it again."
He fumbled the cucumbers out of his sleeve and shoved them at Sam. "Take 'em. Just let me off." Sam smirked, unimpressed.
"I let you slide this time, if you tell me the truth."
"Where's little Daisy been these past few days?" She went back to her folks' place," Walter stammered, eyes darting everywhere but Sam's face. Sam wasn't buying it. "You're lying through your teeth," he snapped. "Spill it, or we're marching straight to the sheriff's office."
Allrecht.
Walter yelped as Sam's grip tightened. "She's working at the Thompson Ranch, earning some cash."
"That's the truth."
"You just said she was with her folks," Sam growled. "Think I'm some fool you can string along?" I didn't want you thinking I'd lost my nerve."
Walter blabbert, raising a shaky hand. "I swear on high heaven, she's at the Thompsons, no lie this time. If I'm fibbing, my dropped it where I stand."
"You'd better not be playing me again," Sam warned, shoving him back. "If I find out you're full of hot air, you won't walk away next time." With that, he let Walter go, watching him scurry off like a whipped dog. After letting Walter Dunn slink away, Sam Tucker wasn't about to take the man's word at face value. He had a buddy, Jake Carter, who'd been working odd jobs at the Thompson Ranch lately. Sam figured he'd ride into town and track Jake down to get the real scoop on little Daisy. He headed straight back to Clara Sims and filled her in. "Clara, I caught Walter red-handed stealing cucumbers," Sam said, and he swore up and down Daisy's working at the Thompson place. "I don't trust that snake farther than I can throw him, so I'm heading to town to ask Jake Carter what's what." Clara's brow furrowed, worry etching her face. "Sam, you've got to hurry," she urged. "If Daisy's in trouble, we need to know fast. Please, go find Jake and figure this out." "Will do," Sam nodded. "Jake's usually at the ranch during the day, but he rides home come evening. I'll wait for him at his place." With a plan in mind, Sam grabbed a few coins from his pocket, saddled up, and rode into town. He stopped by the general store to pick up a couple of small gifts, a tin of tobacco and a sack of sugar, then made his way to Jake's little cabin on the edge of town. Sam figured he'd have to cool his heels till Jake got back, but when he knocked, the door creaked open, and there was Jake himself, looking surprised.
"Sam Tucker."
"You're here early," Jake said, scratching his head. "Thought you'd be out hauling stone today. Ranch work's all done already." "Nah, I ain't here for work," Sam chuckled, handing over the gifts. "Been a spell since we last jawed, 40-50 days at least. Figured I'd drop by and catch up." Jake took the tobacco and sugar with a grin.
"Well, ain't you the polite one?"
"No need for all this, but come on in." He waved Sam inside, figuring his old pal might be between jobs and looking for a place to crash. They'd worked together plenty back in the day, and with gifts in hand, Jake wasn't about to turn him away. That night, Jake's wife fried up some cornbread and beans, and the two men settled in with a jug of cider to swap stories. Sam didn't waste time beating around the bush. "Jake, when you were at the Thompson Ranch a couple days back, did you ever hear tell of a gal named Little Daisy? Pretty as a picture, slim build, with a rosy blush to her cheeks." Jake had a few swigs of cider under his belt by then, and his tongue loosened up. He leaned in close, voice dropping to a whisper. "Sam, I saw something at that ranch I wasn't supposed to see. That's why I hightailed it out of there, claimed I was sick and quit on the spot."
"What you say?"
Sam pressed, leaning forward, his gut tightening. "It's that little Daisy you're asking about," Jake said, eyes darting like a spooked horse.
"Her first night at the ranch, that no good son of the Thompsons, Tom Thompson, got his hands on her.
Forced himself on her, he did. Poor gal couldn't take it. She bolted from the house, ran straight to the old dry well out back, and threw herself in. Killed herself right there."
"What?" Sam's voice cracked like a whip.
"She really went to the ranch, and took her own life that night?" Jake nodded grimly. "If word got out, Tom Thompson would be in a heap of trouble, maybe even swing for it. I reckon he'd kill to keep it quiet. That's why I lit out, didn't want no part of that mess." "But you're always back home at night," Sam said, puzzled.
"How'd you say all this?"
"That night, the work ran late," Jake explained. "I bunked at the ranch instead of riding home. Round midnight, my stomach started acting up, too much of their greasy stew, I reckon. I got up to find the outhouse, but that place is a maze. Wandered the yard half an hour and still couldn't spot it. Finally, I figured I'd just use the dry well to relieve myself. Before I got there I saw her, little Daisy, clothes all torn, running like the devil was on her heels. Tom Thompson was chasing after her, laughing like a hyena, calling out, 'Come back, pretty thing, let's have some fun.' She didn't stop. Just jumped right in." Sam sat there, stunned, the cider turning sour in his mouth. He barely slept a wink that night, replaying Jake's words over and over. Come morning, Jake sobered up quick and realized he'd spilled too much. He grabbed Sam's arm, pleading, "Sam, I was 3 sheets to the wind last night, said things I shouldn't have. Don't breathe a word of this to nobody, or me and my wife are done for." "Don't fret," Sam said, clapping him on the shoulder. "I was half drunk myself, don't recall a thing you said." It was a white lie to calm Jake down, and it worked. Jake let out a shaky breath, relieved. By noon, Sam was back in the saddle, hightailing it to the village to find Clara. He laid it all out, Daisy's awful fate and how she died so unjustly. "Clara, what do we do?" he asked. "Should we take this to the sheriff and demand justice?" If we go stirring up trouble now, we'd need Jake to back us up, Clara said, chewing her lip. But he's scared stiff of the Thompsons retaliating. He won't testify, and without him, we've got no case.
So wie just lädt Daisy die vor Not hing.
Sam snapped, fists clenching.
Lädt set rotten Tom Thompson wog free.
Clara thought hard, then her eyes lit up. Maybe I've got away, she said. But I'd need to get inside the Thompson ranch myself.
Sam, jure a clever fella. Can you figure out how to sneak me in tere?
No chance, Sam said, shaking his head fast.
Jure too pretty, Clara.
If Tom Thompson lays eyes on you, he'll try the same thing he did to Daisy. I ain't risking that, not for a second. Clara gave a cold little laugh and leaned in close, whispering something in Sam's ear. Whatever she said, it set his jaw firm. They'd need Walter Dunn's help to pull it off, and that was a gamble all its own. Sam Tucker couldn't argue with Clara's grit, so he hatched a plan. They'd need Walter Dunn to grease the wheels. Sam tracked him down and spun a yarn about a golden opportunity, work at the Thompson ranch that'd line his pockets. Walter, still itching for cash to fuel his gambling, didn't blink twice. That afternoon, he grabbed Clara and led her straight into town, with Sam trailing behind in the shadows to keep an eye on things.
Walter Knese lay off the land at the Thompson place.
He sidled up to the ranch foreman, Jim Hanks, and struck a deal on the quiet. For $2 silver, he handed Clara over as a new hired hand. No papers, no fuss, just a quick handshake. Jim, always eager to curry favor with young Tom Thompson, hightailed it to the boss's son with the news. Got you a real pretty gal this time, Tom.
Fresh off the trail.
Tom snuck a peek at Clara from the porch, and his eyes nearly popped out of his skull. She was a stunner, like an angel dropped from the heavens. He grinned like a fox in a henhouse and told Jim, fix her up a room of her own. I'll be paying her a visit tonight, gonna have me some fun.
Come nightfall, when the ranch hands were snoring and the moon hung low, Tom crept to Clara's door.
He jimmied the lock and slipped inside, his boots barely making a sound. Clara, lying in bed, heard him coming. She sat up, voice soft but sharp.
Wo's tere?
Sneaking into a gal's room in the dead of night ain't exactly polite, you know. It's me, darlin', Tom chuckled, stepping closer. Tom Thompson, eldest son of this here ranch. This room's mine, that bed's mine. I'm just here to sleep in what's rightfully my own, nothing rude about that, is there? With a leer, he lunged for the bed, reaching to yank back the blanket. But Clara was ready. She'd tucked a rattlesnake under the covers earlier, a mean little critter she'd caught that afternoon. As Tom's hand brushed the blanket, the snake struck, sinking its fangs deep into his wrist. He let out a howl that could have woken the dead. Snake. There's a snake. It's poison, help. Quiet down, Mr. Thompson, Clara said coolly, striking a match to light a candle. You want to live? Keep your yap shut. Hollering'll just make the venom pump faster. You've got maybe half an hour for its lights out. Tom's eyes went wide as saucers when he saw Clara calmly wrapping the black snake around her arm like it was a pet. Sweat poured down his face, and he stammered, "What do you want?" "Save me, I'll pay you. I've got plenty of money." "I don't want your filthy cash," Clara snapped. "I want the truth. A few nights back, did you pull the same stunt on a gal named Little Daisy? Force yourself on her like some low-down coyote?" And no. Tom lied, figuring nobody but Jim Hanks knew the dirty details. But this gal seemed to see right through him, and it rattled him bad. Clara's voice turned icy. "This snake's venom? Only I know how to fix it. Tell me the truth, and I might let you live a few more days. Lie again, and you won't last till sunrise." She stood up like she was fixing to leave. Tom felt the fire spreading through his veins, his bitten wrist swelling up like a sausage. Panic took hold, and he dropped to his knees, begging. "All right, I did it. I forced myself on Little Daisy, but she went and killed herself after. She's gone. Dead women don't talk. I'll pay her folks. Please give me the antidote." "Write it down," Clara ordered, tossing him a scrap of paper and a pencil. "Every word you just said, plus a bloody thumbprint to seal it. Do that, and I'll let you go." "Fine, fine." Tom scribbled out his confession, hand shaking, then smeared his thumb in the blood oozing from his wrist and pressed it to the page. He figured even if she took it to the sheriff, his pa's money would buy him out of trouble. But Tom didn't count on Clara's next move. She'd slipped him a mild tonic earlier, just enough to ease the pain and keep him alive a spell longer, not a full cure. Come morning, she and Sam saddled up and rode hard for the county seat, straight to Judge Baxter, the toughest lawman this side of the Rockies. They handed over Tom's signed confession, detailing every rotten thing he'd done to little Daisy. Judge Baxter didn't waste time. He rounded up a posse and stormed the Thompson ranch to settle the score. Tom, still weak from the snakebite, and his old man, caught red-handed with their moonshine racket, both faced the gallows. The whole Thompson fortune was seized, their ranch torn apart by the law. As for Walter Dunn, selling his own wife for a couple of bucks wasn't something Judge Baxter could overlook. After a sound thrashing with 50 lashes, Walter was shipped off to a chain gang on the frontier, breaking rocks till kingdom come. Clara Sims and Sam Tucker? They didn't just walk away empty-handed. Judge Baxter handed them a reward for their grit, and while he was at it, he played matchmaker too, tying the knot for them with his own hands. Clara's folks couldn't say no to a judge, so they finally gave their blessing. In the end, Clara and Sam settled down happy as clams, their days of trouble far behind them. That's the end of our first tale, folks. Stick around for the next one, The Frontiersman Who Took the Widow Home. It's a wild ride about a young fella, a scheming gal, and an old woman's warning. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Here's the next tale for you folks, The Frontiersman Who Took the Widow Home. It's a yarn about a good-hearted fella, a crafty widow, and an old woman's warning that just might save the day. Let's dive in. One chilly September afternoon, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long, a young widow named Jenny Carson stood at the gate of her family's rundown homestead in Willow Creek. She was 26, with eyes that sparkled like a mountain stream and a figure that turned heads from here to the next county. Jenny peered down the dusty trail, waiting for a strapping young man named Luke Foster, a local frontiersman known for his strong back and kind heart. "Luke," she called out, her voice soft but pitiful, "could you do me a favor and chop some firewood? Ma's legs ain't what they used to be, and I'm too scared to trek up the ridge alone." "Course I can," Luke replied with a grin, tipping his hat. "I'll head up there right now." Jenny Carson's husband had passed from fever just 6 months back, leaving her high and dry. Her in-laws couldn't, or wouldn't, keep her fed, so a month ago, they'd sent her packing back to her folks' place. Ever since she rolled into Willow Creek, every bachelor in town, from graybeards in their 60s to young bucks in their 20s, had been buzzing around her like flies on honey. And why not? Jenny was a looker, young, pretty, with curves in all the right places. Folks said she was built for bearing sons, a prized trait in those rough-and-tumble days when a man's legacy meant everything. Matchmakers had darn near worn out her doorstep, pitching suitors left and right. But Jenny didn't seem keen on any of them. The old-timers in town had money, sure, but they were creaky as rusty hinges. The young ones, like Luke Foster, had the looks and the grit. Luke was 25, built like an ox, and handy with a rifle, but most were dirt poor. Luke's family didn't even own a proper house, just a leaky cabin with a sod roof. Jenny's folks, especially her ma, didn't cotton to him one bit. They figured she could do better than a penniless frontiersman. So why did Jenny keep calling on Luke to haul water, chop wood, or mend the pig pen? Simple, she saw him as a spare wheel, someone to squeeze every ounce of help out of while she held out for a richer catch. Luke, bless his simple soul, didn't see it that way. He reckoned Jenny had a soft spot for him deep down. Whenever she batted those lashes and asked for a hand, he'd jump to it like a hound on a scent, ready to climb a mountain or wrestle a bear if she said the word. With that, Luke grabbed his axe and a coil of rope, then set off for Rooster Ridge. The ridge got its name from its shape, like a big OL rooster strutting atop the hills. It wasn't the tallest peak around, but it sprawled wide, covered in timber and teeming with game. Luke made a living hunting up there, tracking deer, digging roots, anything to keep his folks from starving. He tromped through the pine thickets, axe swinging at his side, ready to hack down some dry branches for Jenny's firewood. But as he worked, a sound stopped him cold, a ragged sob echoing through the trees, laced with fear. Luke's heart jumped. Some kid from town lost up here, he wondered. Or maybe tangled with a cougar. Better check it out quick. Without a second thought, he gripped his axe tighter and bolted toward the noise. Then, cutting through the sobs, came a gruff voice. "Quit your bawling, or I'll cut your tongue out and stuff your mouth with a rock." The crying choked off fast, like the poor soul had been scared silent. Luke followed the sound, weaving through the brush until he reached a rocky outcrop. There, tucked in a shallow cave to the northeast, he spotted the trouble. The cave was an old hermit's hideout, carved out decades back by a lonesome codger who'd lived there till he kicked the bucket. It still had a stone table and a slab bed inside, but folks steered clear, calling it bad luck. Only hunters caught in a storm ever ducked in for shelter. Peering from the shadows, Luke saw Hank Weaver, a shiftless drifter from town, hunkered in the cave. Hank had nabbed a boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, and tied him up tight as a hog for slaughter. The kid was dressed fancy, silk shirt and all, like some rich man's son. Hank had gagged him with a torn sleeve to keep him quiet, and the boy's eyes were wide with terror, trembling like a leaf in a gale. Luke Foster didn't waste a second sizing up the scene in that cave. He stepped out from the shadows, axe in hand, and planted himself square in front of Hank Weaver. "What's this kid ever done to you, Hank?" he demanded, voice sharp as a blade. "Why re you treating him like a trapped varmint?" Hank's eyes narrowed as he spotted Luke looming there. "Luke Foster, you nosy cuss," he snarled. "I'd advise you to mind your own business and hightail it outta here. Keep poking around, and I won't be polite about it." At first, Hank had flinched, thinking he'd been caught by a posse. But when he saw it was just Luke alone, his nerve came roaring back, and his tone turned ugly. Luke wasn't one to back down from a fight, especially not when right and wrong were on the line. "This kinda troubles my business now," he shot back, standing tall. "Don't think you're some big shot just 'cause you can throw a punch. You don't get to do whatever you please up here." "All right, you asked for it," Hank barked, not bothering with more talk. He swung a meaty fist straight at Luke's jaw. Luke dodged left, then right, playing it smart. He let Hank think he'd found an opening, then ducked low as the drifter lunged again. Quick as a flash, Luke sidestepped and drove a boot hard into Hank's gut. Hank wasn't ready for that. He stumbled forward, sprawling face first into the dirt with a grunt, a regular belly flop that'd make a hog proud. Luke didn't let up. He pounced, pinning Hank down with a knee to his back. Grabbing a fistful of greasy hair with his left hand, Luke let his right fist fly, pounding Hank like a blacksmith working a stubborn horseshoe. Stars danced in Hank's eyes as the blows rained down. Finally, he broke. "Stop, Luke, stop," he wheezed, voice cracking. "I was wrong, mercy, I'm begging ya." "Tell me why you snatched this kid," Luke growled, easing up but keeping Hank pinned. "Who's he belong to?" Hank sputtered, trying to catch his breath. "I don't even know him, swear it. Was just passing through town today when he winged me with a slingshot. Got my blood up, so I tied him up here to teach him a lesson." Luke squinted, only half convinced. "That's so." He stood up slow, brushing off his hands. "Grown man like you, picking a fight with a young'un? Pathetic." "Yes sir, my mistake," Hank whined, scrambling to his knees. "I shouldn't have tangled with him. Look, don't tell a soul about this, all right? If word gets out, I'm done for in this town. My ma's 70, all alone, nobody'd look after her if I can't stay." Luke's heart softened a touch at the mention of Hank's ma. "Fine," he said. "I'll keep my mouth shut. But you tell me where you nabbed him, and I'll see he gets home safe. If I haul him back now, his folks'll skin you alive." "Deal," Hank nodded quick. "Took him from Plainsville, just down the trail. Do me a solid and get him back there. I gotta chop some wood for Ma." With that, Hank bolted out of the cave like a rabbit from a fox, not daring to look back. Luke didn't bother chasing. He knelt by the boy, pulling the gag from his mouth and slicing the ropes with his pocketknife. "What's your name, kid?" he asked gently. "Why'd you go shooting at Hank with a slingshot?" "I'm Charlie Tate," the boy sniffled, rubbing his wrists. "I didn't shoot him, honest. I was playing out back of our house when he grabbed me, clapped a hand over my mouth and dragged me up here." Luke nodded, piecing it together. Charlie wasn't lying. Turns out, the kid was the youngest son of Silas Tate, the richest cattle baron in Plainsville. The Tates doted on him like he was pure gold. Hank Weaver, though, was a no-account drifter, and a gambler to boot. He'd been scraping by, losing more at the card tables than he ever won, and it had him desperate. That afternoon, Hank had been skulking out of town when he passed the Tate spread. He spied Charlie squatting by the back gate, poking at ants with a stick. A light went off in Hank's head. That's the Tate kid, ransom him, and I'll be swimming in cash. Without a second thought, he'd snatched Charlie, hauled him up to Rooster Ridge, and stashed him in the cave. He'd been fixing to write a ransom note when Luke stumbled in and spoiled the whole scheme. Hank hated Luke's guts for it, but he couldn't lick him in a fair fight. So he'd cut and run, leaving Charlie behind. Luke didn't know the full story, figured the kid was just spooked and painting Hank worse than he was. "All right, Charlie," he said, ruffling the boy's hair. "I'm taking you home now. But you've got to promise not to tell your folks Hank nabbed you." Charlie looked up, eyes steady despite the tears. "I know you saved me, mister. I'll tell Pa to reward you. I ain't gonna say you tied me up. I'm 8 years old, I can tell good from bad." Luke chuckled, warmed by the kid's spunk. "No reward needed, long as you know right from wrong." With that, he hoisted Charlie onto his shoulders and hiked down the ridge, heading for Plainsville to deliver him safe and sound. Luke Foster trudged down Rooster Ridge with Charlie Tate perched on his shoulders, the boy clinging tight as they made their way to Plainsville. When they reached the Tate spread, a big fancy ranch house with whitewashed fences, Luke set Charlie down at the gate. Inside, Silas Tate and his wife were tearing their hair out, half crazed with worry. Their boy had gone missing, and they were just about to saddle up and ride to the sheriff when Luke showed up with Charlie in tow. Charlie didn't hold back, spinning the tale of his rescue to his folks. "This fella saved me from a bad hombre up on the ridge," he chirped, pointing at Luke. Silas Tate, a man who never forgot a favor, listened close. When he heard how Luke had tussled with the kidnapper to bring Charlie home, he dug into his strongbox and pulled out $100 silver. "Here, son," Silas said, pressing the money into Luke's hands. "You've earned this and then some." Luke waved it off at first, all humble-like. "Ain't necessary, Mr. Tate. Just glad the boy's safe." But Silas wouldn't hear it, and after a bit of back and forth, Luke pocketed the cash with a sheepish grin. He headed home, the coins jingling in his saddlebag, feeling mighty proud of himself. Thing was, Luke didn't want his folks fretting, or giving him an earful about tangling with trouble, so he kept the whole adventure under his hat. That $100? He stashed it away, figuring he'd find the right time to put it to use. That night, tuckered out from the day's doings, he hit the hay and slept like a log. Come morning, the sun was high before Luke stirred. When he finally rolled out of bed he froze. His cabin door was swinging wide open, and the place looked like a tornado had blown through. Drawers yanked out, blankets tossed, everything in a heap. A thief had struck, plain as day. Luke's mind raced. Odd thing was, the prowler hadn't touched his folks' room, just tore through his own and the main living space. "Reckon they knew about the $100, he muttered, thankful he'd hidden it good. But the thought of that thief coming back gnawed at him. That night, Luke wasn't taking chances. He rigged up a dummy with straw and an old coat, plopped it in his bed, then climbed up into the rafters to keep watch. Sure enough, round midnight, a shadow slipped through the door, quiet as a cat, dressed in black with a bandana over his face. Luke squinted and caught the familiar slump of the shoulders, the wheezy breath. It was Hank Weaver, no doubt about it. Hank crept to the bed, a gleaming knife in his grip. He pressed it to the dummy's neck and hissed, "Luke Foster, where's that $100 Silas Tate gave you? Spill it, or I'll slit your throat." "Hank, you sorry son of a gun," Luke called out, dropping from the rafters with a thud. Hank spun around, eyes wide as he realized he'd been duped. He knew he couldn't take Luke in a scrap. Twice now he'd come up short, so he bolted for the door, hightailing it into the night. Hank didn't dare go home, though. After 2 run-ins with Luke, he figured the frontiersman wouldn't let it slide this time, might even drag him to the sheriff. But Luke had other worries. Hank might come gunning for his folks next, out of spite. So instead of raising a fuss, Luke let it lie. The next afternoon, he took $2 silver from his stash and rode over to Hank's place, handing them to the old Widow Weaver, Hank's ma, to help her get by. Widow Weaver was a straight shooter, not like her no-good son. She took the money with a nod, tears in her eyes. "Bless you, Luke," she said. "You're a good soul. When Hank slinks back, I'll make him learn a thing or two from you." Luke didn't hold out much hope Hank would turn over a new leaf, but he smiled anyway. "Just want him to straighten up, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat before heading off. On his way back, Luke swung by Jenny Carson's place, figuring he'd see if she needed a hand. Just as he reached her gate, he caught sight of her, tears streaming down her face, running full tilt toward the creek outside town. "Jenny! What's wrong?" Luke hollered, chasing after her. He caught up just as she hit the water's edge. "Luke," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands, "I can't go on like this." Before he could blink, she threw herself into the shallow creek. Luke didn't hesitate. He splashed in after her, hauling her back to the bank. "Jenny, what in tarnations got you so riled?" he pressed, shaking the water from his boots.
"You gotta tell him what's eating you."
Jenny hiccuped through her tears, spilling the whole mess. "A year back, Ma took sick, and I borrowed $20 from my husband's kin to pay the doc. Now they showed up this morning, demanding $100 back by tomorrow, or they'll haul me to court for stealing. We're so broke we can't even buy a sack of meal. Where am I gonna get $100? I'd rather drown than face jail." Luke frowned, scratching his head. $20 turned into $100? That's downright mean.
"Did you sign a nyting wen you borrowed it?"
"Yep," Jenny wailed. "Wrote a note, put my mark on it. I ain't got a leg to stand on." Luke chewed on that for a minute, then took her hand. "All right, Jenny, I'll figure out a way to get that $100.
Met et town gate tomorrow at 4.
We'll ride to your in-laws and get that note back. How's that sound?" "Luke, how are you gonna pull that off?" Jenny asked, wide-eyed.
$100 ein pocket change.
He grinned, ready to impress her.
"Yesterday, I savet Silas tates boy from a lowlife up on the Ritsche.
Silas gave me $100 as thanks." "That's how." Jenny's face lit up, and she grabbed his arm tight.
"Jure my savior, Luke."
"I can't repay you, but when we settle this, I'll marry you, I swear it."
Luke's heart shipped a beat.
"That's all I needed to hear," he said, beaming. "Go dry off, it's getting cold. I'll get everything ready, and we'll head out tomorrow." "Thank you, Luke," Jenny sniffled, managing a smile. "Meeting you's the best luck I've ever had." She headed home, leaving Luke buzzing with excitement as he started prepping for the trip. Luke Foster spent the evening packing his gear, some jerky, a canteen, and that precious $100 tucked safe in his saddlebag. He was raring to go, dreaming of settling Jenny's debt and winning her hand. But just as dawn broke, Widow Weaver, Hank's old ma, showed up at his door, her face creased with worry. "Luke," she said, voice low and urgent, "you fixing to ride out with that Jenny Carson today? To her in-laws?"
"Don't do it, shall be the ruin of you."
Luke blinked, startled.
"What are you getting at, Mom?"
The widow didn't mince words. "You got that $100 from Silas Tate, didn't you?" My good-for-nothing boy Hank somehow sniffed it out. "He's teamed up with Jenny to fleece you. They're planning to lure you out to her in-laws' place, knock you cold on the trail, and swipe that cash." Luke's jaw dropped, a cold sweat prickling his skin. Turns out, Hank and Jenny had been thick as thieves for a while, closer than folks knew. After failing to nab Luke's money twice, Hank had cooked up a scheme with Jenny. She'd played the damsel in distress, faking that creek plunge to hook Luke's sympathy and his silver. The plan was simple. Luke would bring the cash, follow Jenny out of town, and Hank would bushwhack him on the way, leaving them free to split the haul and hightail it out of Dodge.
Haut Vido viva no?
She'd overheard them plotting. A few nights back, Jenny had slipped over to Hank's shack for a rendezvous. While they were tangled up, whispering their scheme, the widow had shuffled past on her way to the outhouse and caught every word. Remembering Luke's kindness, how he'd given her money despite Hank's rotten ways, she couldn't let her son ruin a good man. Blood or not, she picked right over wrong. Luke reeled, hardly believing Jenny could be so two-faced. But the widow's tale rang true, and he wasn't about to let them play him for a fool. "Time to turn the tables," he muttered. He saddled up and rode to the town elder, Old Man Grayson, spilling the whole story. Then, cool as a cucumber, he grabbed his $100 and met Jenny at the gate at 4, just like they'd planned. Jenny flashed a sweet smile as they set out, leading him down a lonesome trail through Green Hollow. Luke kept his eyes peeled, and sure enough, as they rounded a bend, Hank Weaver sprang from the brush, a stout club raised high. But Luke was ready. He dodged quick, spinning around to face them both. "Jenny," he said, voice hard as iron, "I was a dang fool for you. Never figured you'd stoop so low as to team up with this snake to rob me blind."
"Tats a low down rotten trick."
Jenny's smile twisted into a sneer. You've got it all figured, huh, Luke? She taunted. Sure, I knew you were sweet on me, but I don't cotton to you.
You ein slick-talking orphan like Hank.
I was just using you, sorry it had to come to this. Got it, Luke nodded, his heart sinking but his resolve firming up. He turned to Hank.
I lädt you oft wisse before, hoping you'd mend your vice.
But you didn't just keep on, you got worse. Now I've got no choice but to haul you in, let the law sort you out.
Hank laukhet, cocky as ever.
You might have licked me before, Luke, but you ain't catching me this time. Drop that cash, or I'll make sure your folks' chickens don't cluck no more. But his grin froze mid-cackle. From the trees stepped Widow Weaver, Old Man Grayson, and half a dozen townsfolk, armed with shovels and righteous fury, closing in tight. You miserable whelp, the widow spat at Hank. Doing dirt like this and still strutting around proud?
Shame on you.
Hank's bravado crumbled when he saw his ma among the crowd. He knew the jig was up. Dropping his club, he sank to his knees before her. Ma, I'm sorry, he mumbled, head bowed low. Jenny stood there, smirking till the end, but it didn't save her. Grayson and the posse rounded them both up and marched them to the sheriff. Hank took 80 lashes, his face branded with a thief's mark, then got shipped off to a chain gang on the frontier. Jenny got 60 lashes and was sentenced to hard labor as a servant, her scheming days done. Luke Foster came out on top, like good folks often do. With a nudge from Silas Tate, he opened a tailor shop in Plainsville and married a kind, pretty gal from town. To pay back Widow Weaver's honesty, he took her in, treating her like his own ma till her last days. And that's the tale, folks. If you liked it, drop a holler below, don't forget to subscribe and share. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next story.